Hey everybody, welcome to the Unsung Podcast. Before we begin this episode, just want to let anyone know listening, this may include details about suicide and self-harm. If you or someone you know is struggling in Canada, just text 988 or call 988. The US 1-800-273-8255 or check the links in the description as well. Um, Today I'm joined by Zach, a guy I met on a podcaster's page looking for a guest. And he actually has his own podcast too, and he's got an incredible story of turning something very horrible around. And I had to have him on a chat with her. So, Zach, welcome to my little show.
Yeah, thanks, man. I'm glad we were finally able to make it happen.
Yeah, it's been a little while, but our days finally lined up, and we're gonna exchange episodes. And let's start right in. Let's tell everyone your story.
Yeah, so oh my gosh, sorry, I already had to clear my throat. I, I my name is Zach Tidwell. I'm 29 years old now, and I lost my sight almost 6 years ago on March 31st, 2019, to a suicide attempt when I shot myself in the head. That was about 9 months after I got out of the Marines. I served for 4 years and was a machine gunner and deployed twice, but thankfully never saw combat. But from a combination of head injuries and personal circumstances, and what really boils down to a lack of healthy coping skills following that head injury led me down a bad path, and I didn't speak up about it, and it got me here. So now I'm completely blind and deaf in one ear amongst some other smaller things, but that's kind of where we're at today.
That's unreal, man. Well, first of all, I'm glad you're still here, and I've been listening to your podcast called Going in Blind. And it's great, man. I love it. Just how you've turned this around and now you're sharing stories with others. My hope more so than having you on, if there's someone out there struggling, listening in to us and they're feeling alone or feeling like they don't want to be around anymore, there's people out there that give a shit about you. And just seeing what you've done since, it's inspiring. So I guess I got to ask you when you woke up first after, and you obviously were in the hospital. What's the first thing that went through your head? Like,
I honestly, and I was so out of it, I think from a combination of the brain injury from shooting myself and all the medications I was on because I was on life support for a while.
wow,
After they took me off, I was so out of it that I could have a conversation like we're having right now, but I didn't understand that I was blind because even though I couldn't see you, I would see these very vivid settings and none of them really made sense. But again, I was so not with it that I didn't pick up on that. But at some point, once they did make the point that I was blind and it got it across to me, it kind of became like, all right, you're totally blind, deaf in one ear, and I they kept the bullet hole open in my forehead for like 40 days, but they were telling me that I was going to get sight back in my left eye when I had my facial reconstruction surgery because I don't know if you can see like the ridge on my nose in the camera here, but
yes.
basically between my eyes, and that ridge is the edge of a titanium plate, but between my eyes, so this upper portion of my the bridge of my nose, the lower part of my forehead, my sinuses, and my like most of my right eye socket are a big titanium plate now. All that bone was gone. So they said that when they got back in there and pieced everything together, that I would get some sight back in my left eye. And eventually that bomb got dropped on me one day when the ICU doctors were making rounds. But for that time in between, it was like, hey, being deaf in one ear and that's not going to be that big of a deal if I get sight back in one eye. They didn't know how much, but then one day the ICU doctors were making their rounds, and this doctor, without any sort of preamble, was just going through her normal checks like, all right, what's your name? Zach Tidwell, what are you here for? I shot myself. And all right. And she said something to the effect of, and you're going to be totally blind for the rest of your life. And I was like, what? Like, what the fuck are you talking? And she just kind of dropped it on me and then left. And later that day, when my parents got to the hospital, we were talking and just talking about what my life might be like afterwards. And like my mom mentioned, like you could get a guide dog, and then there's another idea thrown out that maybe you could be a therapist because I was going to college to be an ER nurse after I got out of the Marines. Can't do that blind, but I my mind went to the salt and pepper shakers in the Marine Corps Chow Hall on my area of base where I was stationed in Southern California. And in little fine print said made proudly by the blind and visually impaired. And I'm not sure why in that moment when they started throwing out ideas, like that's what popped into my mind. And I'd never been around a blind person before, but I said, I'm not making fucking salt and pepper shakers. And my parents were like, what are you talking about? And I explained it, but it was like, I was dead set on not just becoming a bump on a log because I had done this to myself. And I was determined to live a life that meant something and do something that meant something and live with a purpose and not drop my standards just because I was blind now. And I wanted to turn it into something positive. And that really, I mean, the decision was kind of made then. And there's been a lot of stumbling along the way that I'm sure we will get into, but it's it just that's how I was raised and something in me. It just I'm a Marine and I still had that mindset.
That's unreal. What was the turning point that kind of set you from despair to determination with just, making something out of this?
It was that, or do you mean like later on or in that conversation that happened?
I mean, later on, like when did you come up with the idea to start the podcast? Just trying to help inspire other people, not, to go down that road or,
Yeah, it's been so that was back in 2019, so there's been a lot there in between. And if I start rambling too much, you can tell me, but there's important stuff in there that is, part of this whole story. And I think is important for people to hear because like you mentioned, someone listening to this is probably struggling. And like the reason that I share this stuff is because I think if I had heard a story similar to mine before I shot myself, I probably would have snapped out of that stupor that I was in.
well,
And or at least I like to think that because I think that by the t time you've reached that point, you've surpassed the point of rational thought. But I was stubborn to the point of I thought that it was weak to speak up, and so I was just going to grit my teeth through it. And someone else hearing this might realize, like, hey, you know, I've gotten through worse things now since being blind because I did speak up. But basically, the next like big ticket item for me was I wanted my independence back. I had to relearn how to walk. I had to relearn how to brush my teeth and feed myself and go to the bathroom. And I wanted to get back out on my own. Early on, I thought that I was going to have to live in a nursing home or something or live with my parents for the rest of my life. But I got transferred to the VA hospital and they had blind rehab professionals there who all have at least master's degrees in blind rehab. And during my intake, the woman running the visual impairment services team like asked me all the stuff that I used to like to do. And like an asshole, I was like, well, what I could see, I like to ride motorcycles and downhill mountain bike and ski and do all this other stuff. And she was like, well, you'll still, if you want to, you will still be able to do pretty much all of that except for the motorcycles. And so I clung on to that and started chasing my independence. And it wound up being that 8.5 months after I shot myself, I was snowboarding again. That was before
well,
I could cook for myself or anything, but I was snowboarding again up in the Rockies, which was absolutely my favorite thing to do. I mean, that's the whole reason I moved back to Colorado after I got out of the Marines so that I could be near the mountains to snowboard. And so that was huge for me. A month after that, so about 9.5 months after I shot myself, I was back in college. I started pursuing an undergraduate degree in clinical psychology. And 6 months after that, I was back out on my own. And that whole time, especially once I was back out on my own, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I knew I was going to be independent again and I was going to do whatever that took. And I got lost in downtown Denver several times and had to be bailed out and ended up in some sketchy situations. But I mean, I was determined to do this. And by the end of 2020, I bought my first house. And that's shortly after that is when I really started to struggle again. It was like the middle of COVID lockdowns, very beginning of 2021. COVID lockdowns are heavy. I was living in that downtown Denver where I didn't know anyone and I was very, very isolated. And I think the pace of everything slowing down made me stop and finally register like how difficult my life was now. Because it is everything, and I'm not saying this whining now. I don't think about this stuff anymore. Like being blind to me, I honestly, I don't think about it a lot. It comes up every once in a while, but at this point in time, I was struggling with that. Everything took me so long, and everything was just a pain in the ass. And I also I didn't have much I could do for myself. I had my house, I worked out every day, and I had my homework, but like I didn't. That was kind of all I had. That was the rest of the time I would sit around and listen to podcasts or audiobooks because I didn't know how to do anything else, and I hadn't learned how to navigate some of the things that I do now. But and by that point, I was skiing and rock climbing and stuff like that, but it's not like that's something that I get to go do all the time. I can't drive. So these are onesies and twosie trips that I have. But I, for whatever reason, reached the point in early 2021 where I did not want to be alive. And it made no sense to me. And I knew that. Everything had gone so well for me despite having lost everything. I had rebuilt myself and was completely back out on my own. And that was like the only thing that I'd wanted for the past year and a half, almost 2 years at that point. But for whatever reason, I was struggling and I saw the writing on the wall where that was going to go. I had learned my lesson from having shot myself, and I had a psychologist who I still speak to once a week, but we went for our weekly call and I realized like I have to speak up or I'm going to do something crazy again. And I was terrified that I was going to be whisked away to a hospital and locked in a padded room and sedated until someone deemed that I wasn't a harm to myself or anyone else. And so I still think that speaking up was probably the bravest thing that I've ever done because I told her when we got on the phone, like I don't know why I do not want to be here and I can't explain it. I just know that I don't, but I don't want to hurt myself. And so she was just there for me and we started talking every day and sometimes multiple times a day because I think especially because I was sober during that time that is the probably the worst depression that I've ever dealt with. I more so than leading up to my suicide attempt, but I was talking about it and I started to learn the skills to cope with that. And it took a couple months, but I got out of that rut. And that was for me the proof of, hey, this can and will get better so long as I show up and do the work. Like that is the caveat there because I had done everything to keep up appearances that I possibly could, that I was doing okay in the time leading up to my suicide attempt. Like I'd had a traumatic brain injury shortly after I had found out that my wife was having an affair on me, and I returned from that deployment,
Oh,
came home, tried to make things work, had the traumatic brain injury, and then spiraled and did everything to hide it, even to the extent where a couple days after I had decided I was going to kill myself, my parents were at my apartment with my little sisters, and I didn't say anything. And then even minutes before I shot myself, I talked to my roommate and then went back in my room and shot myself. And so I had never experienced actually dealing with any of that, and this was proof to me that it could. And so that was a big learning experience. And moving forward, coming out of that summer in summer of 2021, I hit a my first math class as a blind guy, which is it's a notoriously hard subject for both blind people and Marines. Math is a rough one, and but it wasn't accessible to my screen reading software. So like all the that's how I joined the Zoom call. My computer talks to me and my phone does it too. But for my computers to be able to access that stuff, it has to be like developers who write the all interface code, so the visual elements that you see and interact with on your screen can take extra steps to make that stuff accessible with access technology like my screen reading software. And this platform that the school was using wasn't, and instead of adapting my materials to make them accessible like they were legally obligated to do, they assigned someone to be my eyeballs. So I had a sighted student who we would meet over Zoom and do my statistics homework and exams where she would read me these huge data sets. And then I would do incremental calculations on my talking scientific calculator and then, you know, put something in a Word document, do another calculation, another Word document, and then give her an answer. And then we'd move on to the next question. And that pissed me off because by that point, again, I was doing all of those things and back out on my own, and I had just started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and just another thing where I'm doing this, doing martial arts against people without disabilities, and like it bothered me that if you stuck that in front of me, I couldn't do anything about it, and all of a sudden I was beholden to needing help from someone again because I'm horrible about asking for help, which is probably a character flaw, but I wanted my independence and I thought I had earned it. So I actually started researching what causes those issues. Like how come, I didn't know the fact that developers could make things accessible intentionally. I just knew sometimes my screen reader worked and sometimes it didn't. And when I found out that it came down to the code of each app or website that I was accessing, I decided that I was going to become part of the solution. So I dropped out of college and actually taught myself how to code so that I could make these accessible solutions because this is actually a huge problem. Like more software and websites are inaccessible than are accessible, and it's a
Mhm.
huge issue. So started doing that, but I also that kicked off my alcoholism again. I hadn't realized leading up to my suicide attempt that I was an alcoholic. And I tried blowing off some steam the night after we took my first exam in that class. And this was like basically right before I had decided that I was going to drop out and teach myself how to code. And it like unlocked my addiction that I hadn't realized was there. I hadn't realized that I had an addiction because I was living I was a functioning alcoholic, meaning that I was being productive. So to me, that's not what an alcoholic was. An alcoholic was someone who couldn't hold a job and because they were passed out on the street or they were homeless and just drinking their lives away. But I wasn't that. And so that actually kicked off 2.5 years of rampant alcoholism for me, during which point, and I'm gonna speed through the 2.5 years here, but basically by the time that I realized that I needed help, I went to rehab, and while I was at rehab, was actually diagnosed with a horrendous genetic disease that is incurable and will ultimately turn me into a vegetable, barring that there are no medical advances. Like there's nothing they can do about it. The only thing you can really do is eat right and not be an alcoholic and exercise to hopefully delay the onset. And so things got worse, and I continued to drink after I got home from rehab. I got to the point where I was blackout binging for 2 or 3 days straight, recovering for 2 or 3 days, and then doing it all over again. Like I couldn't even make it a week without a drink. Making it 2 or 3 days, usually in between, was only because I was so hungover and or like had the memory of the horrible hangover that I was like, all right, I can make it another day without a drink. And but that I know your original question was, what made me want to start having an impact essentially. And that really is where like the beginning of that starts is when I dropped out of college and started teaching myself how to code and what kicked off that alcoholism. So
And that's
I'll
insane.
pause
Like
here. Yeah.
I self-taught myself how to play guitar, which I thought was pretty impressive, but
Yeah.
holy shit. I read somewhere about an app called Xanagrams. Is
Yeah.
that's what this is?
That's what the first one was. And again, so that brought us where I went to ultimately kind of brings us to 2023 is when Xanagrams came out. So this whole time that I'd been drinking myself half to death, which is, ultimately I really did. I thought that I was going to die from my addiction. I could not stop. And I was
Hmm.
trying that entire 2.5 years and I could not just couldn't figure it out. And it was baffling to me because I'm so disciplined in every area of my life. But as soon as it came to alcohol, like that just went out the window. It was bizarre, but that's addiction. But that whole period, I was still teaching myself how to code when I was coherent enough to do so. And I'm just Googling, looking up articles online and teaching myself. And that finally, all that effort, that half drunken and half sober effort finally came to fruition in 2023. Xanagrams was released on the 4th of July. It was a game, but this is like the basis of everything that I'm working on now because of the underlying techniques that I implemented. So it looked and functioned normally for people without disabilities. So if you downloaded it, you would have no idea that there's anything special about it, except it might be a little plain because a completely blind dude made it. So it's probably kind of ugly, but it it looked and functioned normally for people without disabilities, and then it was accessible for virtually any physical disability, all the way from for someone who was legally blind, it would automatically scale all of the fonts and things like that, and the symbols, and even make high contrast color options for those people to be able to see better. Colorblind people, it adapted to people who were totally blind, like myself, could use it with screen readers. People who were totally blind and totally deaf could even use it with Braille through these really cool devices called refreshable Braille displays. But at the same time, you could control it with your voice if you had no arms or spinal cord injury, and that at the same time, so that came out on the 4th of July, and I started getting this feedback from people where like, man, like this is awesome. It's this value that it's bringing to my life, and the fact that I can also enjoy this around amongst my wife or my friends who can see, and or my friends who aren't paraplegic or whatever. And I started like it started registering to me like, okay, this thing, it is just a word game, but it's having an impact on people. And that positivity was like, I had finally come full circle and put something into the world that was helping people. And I felt like I had found my purpose again because I had really struggled after not being able to become a nurse, like, which was, I was a machine gunner in the Marines. Nothing about being a machine gunner or like any of the associated jobs like police work and stuff like that can be done blind. Being an ER nurse, being a nurse at all, you can't be blind. And I really floundered after that in terms of like not, I was going to college, but I was just doing it so that I was doing something productive and working towards something instead of doing nothing. But coding felt like I'd finally found my purpose and because I could have an impact there. And so I strung together a month of sobriety and then fell off the wagon a little bit and then made it 2.5 months and then fell off the wagon for one night. And I haven't had a drink since December 5th of 2023. And at the end of the year, Xanagrams won two awards for the all basically purely all of the accessibility stuff that I did. I mean, this was kind of groundbreaking stuff. And I again, it continued to like ingrain in me that I was having an impact, and it has carried me forward from there. And there's more that comes after that, but I'll pause here again because I know that's a lot.
That's all real, man. But holy shit. I do gotta ask you though, as you mentioned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, did you ever get like sparring with someone that had zero disability? Like how, I'm just curious how that would even work.
Yeah, everyone. So, are you familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at all?
No, I've done boxing
Okay.
and my daughter does Muay Thai, but
Okay.
I've got friends that are instructors, so I've seen
Okay. Yeah.
sparring.
So it's the polar opposite of of Muay Thai or boxing because there's no striking and it's all trying to strangle each other or snap each other's limbs. So it's perfect for me because it's all by feel.
Hmm.
I like when I compete and even at my gym, I'm the only one with disabilities. So it's all the only adaptations that they make. because in tournaments, typically people start standing up and a couple feet away from each other. When it's me, we get to start. I start with grips, so they'll close the space between us. I get to, if it's in the gi, I get to grab my opponent's collar on one side and their sleeve on the other, and they get to grab me, just so that we're connected. And if it's no gi, then we just tie up in like a wrestler's tie, and it's other. From there, it's fair game. The refs, like, if someone intentionally detached from me and like tried walking 10 feet away to walk in a circle around me, they would bring us back together. But when there's scrambles and stuff, they just let it go. It's really, and because of the nature of jujitsu, like really is a game of giving and taking space. It really is perfectly suited for someone doing it without being able to see. It is, it's kind of rough when we're standing up and I'm trying to wrestle with people and I can't see where their legs are and stuff, but you can feel a lot of that movement and where people are stepping. And so once we're on the ground, it's pretty fair game.
It's unreal, man. I don't know if you got any videos of that, I'd love to throw it on the end of the YouTube version of this so people can see it.
Okay,
But
I know there's probably some, I think from my first tournament on my Facebook. I
okay.
can see if you'd have to look through there,
Oh
but
yeah,
I
I'll go
can.
have a look.
Okay, cool.
Let's talk about your podcast here. How do you choose guests for it? I mean, do you edit it yourself? That kind of blows my mind as well, because I know I'm
Yeah. So the podcast all came about actually because so that what I just talked about took us through the end of 2023. Everyone had been telling me that I needed to write a book for several years. Basically, everyone's like, "Oh, you should write a book," just because I had survived, but like I hadn't really done anything, and especially not while I was being a drunk piece of shit for 2.5 years. So I I hadn't written the book because I was like, "There's nothing to write a book about." But after after Xander Games had won those awards, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this. And I started writing that in like the middle slash late January of 2024 and wound up finishing that on Thanksgiving of 2024, the first draft. And I'd been wanting to do the podcast for a couple of years. So I was like, you know what, this is a perfect time to do it. I'm going to have a little bit more time here with not writing so much. I mean, there's the editing process and all that, and a lot of revising, but that was my goal. So I started this back in December, and like you said, it's called Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell, and kind of very similar to you. I'm just following my curiosity, but it's not following my curiosity to the extent of speaking with people who have accomplished big things or who are doing who are these are impressive people that I'm curious to pick their brains. It's I've had everywhere from co-founder and executive director of a nonprofit on to I've got a former Navy SEAL coming on soon. I just had a former Super Bowl champ come on. I've had the guy who was on Shark Tank and got a deal and it started this business out of his garage and is now, doing over $1 million in revenue per year. Like he's just killing it. And I've been able to connect with all these interesting people and kind of like you, I've fallen in love with it.
yeah.
This part of it, the conversation part of it, the editing is hell. And some of that is because I guess I've never edited audio and I could see, so I don't know what that process is like, but it is freaking time consuming trying to do it with a screen reader because I mean, I can't look at the sound, the
Mhm.
waveform files and stuff. I have to listen to the whole thing and then kind of pick out like, okay, I heard someone's, mouth clicking there and I need to silence that or whatever. And it's just that part's miserable, but it's worth it. I mean, I love doing it. And the hope, I'm sure like you probably have is, maybe 2 years from now, I'll have some sponsors and I can pay someone else to do the editing so that I have more time. Because I'm been working on another software project since last March, and that will hopefully revolutionize education for people with disabilities in the sense
Wow.
that I'm taking all of these. strategies and techniques that I used with Xanagrams for the accessibility stuff and applying that to stuff that will solve some of the issues that I had while I was in college, but for other people. And it'll still be usable for people without disabilities, but like the thing that I refuse to waver on is the accessibility piece. So been real busy between the book, that, and now the podcast. It's kind of burning the candle at both ends. But yeah.
Who's your so give me three dream guests for you. And when I load this episode, I'm gonna tag every single one of them.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. Uh it's funny because if I hadn't just got put on the spot, like I know I have a list in my computer of people that I've heard that I would love to talk to. I Lex Friedman is one for sure. I'm not, are you familiar with him?
Not right off the top of my head, no.
He has a podcast. He's way more intelligent than I could ever be, and probably more than, 99% of the people listening to this. He's a robotics researcher out of MIT and he's also a martial artist, but just a very intriguing dude. And I want to know what makes him tick because when you hear him speak, he's different. And I'm
Okay,
curious.
I Googled them quick. I know who that is. I've watched some of his stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lex Friedman. Oh my gosh, I wish I had my list up here because I have these names in my head, but I'm like, hey, it's gonna be a couple years before I can even talk to any of these people.
No, you know
Um,
what? Wait, if you think about it after, just send me a message and I'll put them in the description and I will tag them on wherever I post this.
okay, because I'll go. I want to go through my list and figure out who would be the top three there.
See, I had Michael Landsberg come on my show and he's a former sports broadcaster for like our version of ESPN in Canada. It's called TSN. And this guy is a mental health uh just he runs a program called Sick Not Weak. And about 4 years ago on Twitter, I posted my weakest moment that I called then when I was on a balcony downtown Calgary and thought to myself, would anyone even give a shit if I leaped off here? So I put it in the caption that I've never posted about this moment of weakness before in my life. Not even 10 minutes later, I get a reply from this guy who I've been watching for 30 years on TV saying, dude, that was your biggest moment of strength of your life.
Because you didn't do it.
Yeah, because I posted about that and it was going to inspire people and just, if there's someone else, because I was like 9 pitchers of beer, like 9 big giant pints of beer in that night. That was probably my darkest moment.
That's what I wanted to ask was if you were on because I think that plays such a big role in I mean, just suicide as a whole, right? It's especially in the veteran community. When I got out of the Marines in 2018, the number that was touted was 22 American veterans are committing suicide every day. And I heard during the heart of COVID, and I've heard since that it has gotten as high as 40 a day.
Wow.
And you have to wonder how many of those guys, because even like me, I drank that night for some liquid courage. Like who knows? Because when I had decided I was going to kill myself on March 27th of 2019. I didn't know when, but that was, I'd felt like I was in this inescapable place. And that was the first night I'd ever mishandled a firearm in my life. I cleared out my concealed carry firearm and held it to my head. And it was like, this is such an insane thing to say, but it was like a weight was lifted because I felt like this now I had an escape hatch and but I was sober that night. And so like, I have to, that makes me wonder because I was drinking on the 31st when I shot myself and, in the attempt to get some liquid courage to go through with it, like, would I have gone through with that? And that you hear that being a part of so many people's stories of
Mhm.
these where it's, yeah, blood alcohol content was through the roof or he was on these substances. And like for you, had you ever been, had you ever even contemplated it before you were that drunk?
You know what? I was a sad clown for about maybe from the year 2000 till about 2010. Maybe,
It's,
or-
it's 2000 when you were stabbed.
no, 1994.
Okay.
So I wasn't old enough to drink then legally, but It was when I first started getting the anxiety and the panic attacks. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I drank. And then I go out with friends, mostly to karaoke shows. And I found that when I got drunk and I did all this crazy, stupid shit, people would laugh and my anxiety attacks would go away. So I just kept drinking. Um,
Mm,
and then it turned into 3 nights a week, and then it was 5 nights a week, and then it was, Monday to Friday. I'd take Saturday off because I'd watch hockey. And
got to be sober for watching hockey.
you got to
Yeah.
be sober watching hockey. It's a Canadian thing back then. And then Sundays, but Sundays I go out. Some nights it was 6 out of 7 nights a week. Because I go to these pubs where it was like $9 a pitcher. It has specials to lure people in. So I was only spending $60 a day, but I was getting 3 sheets to the wind drunk,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
right? So there was this young lady, well, my good friend of mine, she's only 4 foot, maybe 4'7". I'm 6'2". I'd never seen her mad. Always the biggest smile, just had the voice of an angel. Like when I'd see her coming in and I didn't have a song up, I'd put in like ABBA or Backstreet Boys. I didn't care because I needed to get my name in before her because I didn't want to
Yeah.
go after her ever.
Okay.
So she pulls me into a booth at just after last call with a pot of coffee. And this was about maybe 12 years ago. So I was still in my late 30s. And she just looked me dead in the eyes, right into my soul. And she said, if you don't smarten the fuck up, you're not going to see 50. And
Wow.
that hit me. Like all my friends, nobody had any idea I was going through all this shit in my head, but she saw through it. So my advice, I always tell people on an episode, if you got someone out there that when they ask you how you are and you say fine and they say no, how are you really? You hang on to those people and the people that give you the tough love, the shakeups, because they're going to be the ones you'll remember in 10 years, not the ones that were getting drunk with you being an idiot.
Well, and I think that's another important part of it. A couple
Yeah.
things you said there is with that, like I think a lot of people don't get that feedback necessarily because when you're in that place where you are abusing a substance, you usually end up hanging out with other people who are. And so no one's a shitbag if everyone's doing it,
Yeah.
like, and I think that's a dangerous place where people get stuck, but also, yes, getting that tough love is very important. But if you're that person who is asking someone if they are okay, I try and be very outspoken about this. Be more direct than saying, "Hey, are you okay?" or "How are you doing?" It's like, "Hey, man, you've had 9 pitchers 4 nights this week. Like,
Yeah.
that's not you. I think you're struggling. What is going on there?" Like, not don't just say, "How are you doing?" because people have pe when you're struggling and you're trying to hide, especially like that, if you're drowning, whatever it is that's getting at you, you're probably not going to say the truth unless someone really gets at it, right? Like I think that's a very important thing that people need to be more conscious of because we say like, "How are you?" or "How are you doing?" constantly, and we don't really mean it when we ask. And so I
Yeah.
think at the same time, when we answer that, we're used to not sincerely answering that. But yeah.
I've got
Did
a
you?
really, really close military friend of mine who is a veteran for almost 30 years. He runs a horse therapy program for veterans and first responders with PTSD. And the thing I love about his program is that they invite the families. So, like if it's a guy, a male veteran with PTSD, they invite his wife and his kids. They come to the program with them so that they learn how to live with someone with PTSD, um, which I think is the most important thing in the world too, because I was with someone for a lot of years and there was, why don't you just get over it? Like, just forget about it. Like, they don't, it's a whole different world when you're going through it. Um, the paramedic, the paramedic that saved my life in 1994, she's a painter, she's an artist. And so she sent me a painting. Took me 29 years to find her. I keep it up behind my couch in my living room, but it's a field of tulips, okay? And it's called The Perfect Storm. but there's lightning hitting these tulips. So for anyone that's gone through PTSD, or I'm sure you'll understand this painting, that's exactly what it's like. You could be in a bed of roses, like in having the most amazing moment, and then boom, all you got to do is get through that storm. Because storms don't last very long sometimes. And I kind of tap that painting in a lame kind of Notre Dame football player way every day.
Do you like you're
I
walking out of the locker room?
just want to pretend I'm Rudy, right?
Yeah,
Best movie
that's
ever,
funny.
by the way. Um, yeah, so that's something pretty special I look at every day, and it kind of reminds me just to, stay on pace and talking to people like you, like the shit you've done since this happened to you, man. It's so inspiring. Like I had a I used to do a bit of boxing training and I had a friend come over with me. He was 90% blind. And just talking to you, you remind me of him because he's like, Dave, I want you to teach me how to use a speed bag. I'm blind. I can't see shit, but can you show me how to do it? So I'm like, well, I'll try, right? So I
Yeah,
stand him in front of it, put his arms where they're supposed to be, and like just listen to the sounds. Because when you hit the heavy bag, it's gonna hit 3 times. And then you hit it again and show them the motion. And he kept that thing going. After about 40 minutes working out with him, he kept that bag going for 2 minutes straight. And he just started to cry. And he's like, holy shit, man. He's like, now get me an opponent. I'm like, that doesn't work. You hit a speed bag that's stuck. But yeah, talking to you reminds me of him. That guy would never quit about anything.
yeah. Well, and like that's just like for him, that's again, it's like a reminder. I think it's just yeah, you're like yeah, hey, I still got it. I can still do this shit. You find other ways to do it, but it's like I think what you said, and I think that the name for the painting is the perfect title from my what I pictured in my head of what it sounds like she probably painted it for with the weathering the storm. Like for just remembering like everybody has their shit in this state that you're in, whatever it is that you're dealing with right now is temporary.
Yeah.
And again, with the caveat that you choose, because we have a choice, you had a choice to learn how to deal with your PTSD. Like, yeah, that's not going to go away, but you've learned to deal with it because you like what are you just going to let that define you? Like, you can't be that person.
No.
You have to choose to take ownership of it and learn how to navigate that and know like all right, these are the areas that I struggle with. How can I pay attention to those and then compensate for them when I'm not? And but yeah, just knowing again that there's light at the end of the tunnel for this stuff. And it usually the hardest step with anything for whatever reason with people is getting started. Like that is so cliche to say, but you really do for whatever reason getting that momentum going is the hard thing. But a lot of it's perspective and focusing on the little wins and the incremental little wins. And I think that goes a long way. I mean, like for you, for me, talk therapy was a huge component of this. And talk therapy, it was I tried a bunch of we tried different treatment modalities and stuff like that too, like CBT and stuff like that. But and antidepressants for a time. I've been off of those since October. So like I've learned the coping skills. But for you, what did you use to learn all of your coping skills and really just how to ride those things out?
Well, so I was stabbed by 3 Somalian guys. For a lot of years, whenever I'd see anyone that looked like them, I'd want to do bad things. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, you're such a racist, but you don't see it. To me, it didn't matter if they were like 3 feet high and orange hair and they were from Dublin. Like for me, it was whoever looked like that was gonna come stab me again. Um, so my ex-wife was 8 months pregnant with my daughter. So we were moving, I was loading boxes by myself because I just couldn't get a hold of anybody. And these 3 guys approached me that looked exactly like the dudes that stabbed me. I was ready. I was in my getting ready to fight. In my mind, they were here to attack me. But one of them looked at me and he said, "Dude, do you want some help?" So these 3 guys, that was my big wake up call. So They helped me for 2 hours. I went and saw a therapist. Didn't like her because she was doing some kind of weird snapping thing with her finger, moving her fingers in front of my eyes. And I was like, what the hell is this? And
She's doing voodoo magic on you,
I
dude.
don't know, man, the little voodoo doll or something. But, and I went to see a second one. She was okay, but it just wasn't for me. And then when I started boxing, that's when my mind went to peace. I don't know, something about boxing and the training. That's why I have a tattoo of the Grim Reaper handing me boxing gloves as my whole upper arm.
Hmm.
And it's basically that's me saying, hey, the Reaper saying, smarten up, stick to this. And that's what keeps my mind focused. But for me, it was all boxing and singing and playing guitar. And of course, my daughter. My daughter's almost 11. She's my little lifeline.
Yeah. And do you, so was your ex-wife pregnant with her? That's when all this like this shift happened when you decided to go get
Yeah, she
help.
was 8 months
Okay.
pregnant. So I'm like, man, I'm gonna be a dad soon. I gotta smarten the hell up because the little temper set-offs. I didn't want to be that state of mind having my daughter around. And so it was a series of wake-up calls. It was my short little friend, giving me a head shake and a shit shake at a pub. Um, those three guys come and help me move. My daughter coming along. Yeah, and then starting boxing like 4 years later because I had started and failed so many times. And here I am. I have 98% good days and 2% good days. But doing this podcast, talking to people like you, talking to, excuse me, I had a retired sheriff on, and like you, he had a bottle of Jack Daniels. He had a 12 gauge shotgun. He had his letter written, and then he just stopped. And now he's walking across Canada for the second time. But he didn't put his plan in action, but he was close. He had his letter written, he had the gun, he had the Jack Daniels, he was ready to go. And then something shook him and he stopped. And
Yeah.
that's talking to people like you, talking to I had a world champion power lifter. This guy's won 3 world championships and had 2 cancer diagnoses, leukemia, tongue cancer, lost 20% of his tongue, but he never quit. So it's talking to people like him, talking to people like you and the paramedic that saved my life. It's addicting and I love it. And everybody's like, "Oh man, you're gonna start a podcast. It's gonna go rough and then you'll quit." I'm like, "No, there's no quit because I'm addicted in just telling other people's stories and meeting people like you. You've inspired me so much today just by talking to you, how you've taken what happened to you and helping others. And I've listened to a few of your episodes. I got to catch up on some. I'll admit that, but it's unreal, man. You're an inspiration, and I hope it's inspiring to someone listening to us out there.
Yeah, thanks, man. I mean, I'm sure it's like it's something about, I mean, I really, I believe that we learn the most from each other out of vulnerability, right? And I'm sure like you, I mean, it's easy to open up to you because I know you also have a story. I'm very open about my story, but if I wasn't, I would imagine it'd be easy to open up to you. And that's like, I think my my data set's probably skewed a little bit because given my own story, people feel like they can open up to me about their own
Mhm.
struggles with depression and stuff. But it really seems, again, with the asterisk that I realize this is probably skewed a little bit, but it seems like most people have either dealt with directly suicide in their family or know someone who has. And that's, I'm sure you probably get a lot of people talking to you about like experiences with PTSD and they can learn from these conversations that you're having. And I think it's so important and it's so much more approachable and digestible when it's not someone talking at you and it's people like sharing their real world experience and what's worked and like the reality of like healing from shit like this is not always pretty.
No,
And I think that's another thing that doesn't get it seems like to me, and this is like one of the reasons like I wanted to write my book in the way that I have. There's shit in there that I'm really not proud of, but I think that's important for people to see because it feels like when a lot of these stories are shared, they're kind of scrubbed of the uglier parts of
Hmm.
people's stories for the sake of projecting some sort of virtue or maintaining some sort of virtue. And I I think that's it's almost like that same dilemma that you get with social media, where you see like one side of people's lives, one
Yeah.
small insight, not the whole picture. And I don't know. I think these conversations are an extension of that, just like with the book, where you really, when you get someone to sit here for an hour and talk through stuff, that's really where other people can draw parallels, even if it's not. Yeah, I haven't been I wasn't assaulted with a knife by three Somali dudes, but like I can draw parallels from my life in areas where I've had to make these big adjustments and make a decision to change, and other people can too. I think that's where like the real value in these conversations are. Outside of it just being fun to do. Like I think what you're doing is important.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you a funny story. Me and my daughter wrote a children's book about a year and a half ago. And it basically just about my journey from almost 400 pounds to doing a 5 kilometer race together. And
Oh, you did it with her?
yeah, we did it together. She beat me by
That's cool.
she beat me by half a second, and she still tells me about that.
Of
But
course.
she wanted to race me home, okay, when I was almost 400 pounds. And I had two knife wounds on the left side of my leg that cut the muscle in my leg in half. So I couldn't run back then. I can now for about 20 minutes at a time. But so I put this thing on Amazon. It did pretty good, but there was a month where it only had one sale. And I'm like, well, shit, this sucks. But then I got a message from a US Navy veteran who used to be 450 pounds. He has two twin daughters. He picked up my book, and the same weekend that I did my first 5K run with my daughter, he was doing his first 5K run with his two twin daughters.
Oh, that's weird.
So we both lost over 160 pounds each. He had the same kind of smarten up talk with his doctor because he was a single dad, and the doctor said to him, "Listen, man, do you want someone else raising those two girls? Smarten the hell up." So we both it's almost like a parallel world. He's in like, oh God, Alabama somewhere. I don't know, but somewhere deep in the States. But that one sale that month was him. So, right, it's not about numbers. And that's the thing, if you got to not worry about with these podcasts. It's not about numbers or downloads, it's about impact. I went on with a lady, her name is Carla. Shout out to Carla's Inspirational Podcast because she had me on as a guest. And she's like, listen, Dave, I only get 5 to 7 plays a week, like a month. Like, I'm just starting. Do you really want to come talk to me? Because she had saw my article on Fox and CNN and all this stuff, and she thought it was some big deal, which I'm huge in Singapore. I get lots of downloads in Singapore, but
That
hey,
is still so crazy to me.
I
Like
need a I'm
cool
huge
though.
in Singapore t-shirt.
Yeah.
But so I said to her, I'm like, listen, if there's one of those 7 people that's me on that balcony 10 years ago, then this is worth every minute of my time. That's all I care about. And then like talking to you here, if there's another Marine out there listening or someone that's having thoughts and they've got a letter and a pen to the paper and like, wow, look at this guy. He went through this and now he's making apps and doing jujitsu and talking about pigeons on Dave's podcast. Well,
I've been waiting for that ball to drop. Yeah. You'll-
so yeah, we got, if you want one thing for people to take away from my talk with you about you, or if there's a message of someone out there that's struggling, what do you want to say to them?
You have to speak up. No one no one can help you if they don't know that you're struggling. And it is up to you to help yourself in that regard. And you deserve that. And it can and will get better. And it again, it's that first step is the hardest, and it will start to build momentum, and things will start to those little wins will start to add up. And just remember, there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's other people who have been through it. Everyone has their own shit that they're dealing with, and it's take it from me. I've been through worse things than I went through leading up to my suicide attempt, and I'm still here because I spoke up.
Well, man, I'm glad you are. I'm glad you survived that. It was just amazing just shooting the shit with you. I do have one more question for you. I kind of forewarned you about without telling you what it was. Now, I got before I ask you this question, my close friend Dan was on with me. He's got cerebral palsy, been in a wheelchair since he was 5. He thought he would have an unfair advantage for this question because he's in an electric wheelchair, but we'll see how you do with this. Okay.
All right.
Okay, so 100-meter dash, 100-meter walk. If you're running, walking, doesn't matter. Live pigeon carrying contest. How many pigeons do you still have in your arms at the end of this 100 meters?
How many did I start with?
However many you can pick up. So how many pigeons do you think you could carry 100 meters and still have them in the end of your arms at the end of the race?
It's absolutely 12.
12.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that puts you tied with a martial arts instructor who was a former police detective.
Well, if someone else said it, then that gives me more faith that I can do
Wow, he was
it.
picking up desk items and putting them under his arms. He took this question so serious. It was beautiful. And then the lady I interviewed yesterday, who has a phobia of pigeons and Canadian geese, said zero, not touching them. Next question.
That's seems fair. Like it's zero. I have zero pigeons at the end. Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, thanks for coming on with me. I'm going to put some links to Zach's podcast in the descriptions. Go check out his episodes. And I'm also going to put some helpline information for as many countries as I can find. So if you're out there struggling, have any dark thoughts, just get through the next minute. That's all you got to start with. Start with that 1 minute,
Yes.
then one
And
day, then 1 week, then a month. You'll be glad you did. Look at this.
and
Zach and I had to have this chat. He's carrying 12 pigeons, doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, maybe with some pigeons. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
yeah. And I've called the suicide hotline once before. They got me the help that I need. I mean,
Beautiful.
it's they're there. Call that they're there to help. Those people are volunteering to do that. Use it if you need it.
All right, brother. Thanks for coming on with me. Zach and I are gonna talk about me going on his show later in April, I believe. And I'm glad I crossed paths with you, man. We'll stay in touch for sure.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.